So, about consonants. This is a lesson in phonetics, which is the description of sound, and we're going to talk about consonants briefly in general, but specifically in English. A consonant is any of the sounds that you make by obstructing air in your mouth. So whether you stop the air as in buh, or make the air whistle a little bit as in sh or s, or you even trill the air in Spanish as in rrr. At any rate, you are obstructing air in your mouth, and that's one of the things you have to do, or I should say that's a defining feature of a consonant in phonetic terms. In phonological terms, consonants have a role in creating syllables, but a consonant can't be a syllable. If it is a syllable, it's really a vowel. So how many do we have in English? It depends who you ask, but 24, 26. There are some theoretical distinctions in there. And we describe, oh, and by the way, you should already be scratching your head a little bit because, my gosh, we only have 26 letters in the English alphabet and we use 5 of them for vowels. Uh, well, remember, our alphabet was borrowed from Latin. It's a poor match for the phonetic system of the Germanic languages and English in particular. In order to talk about consonants, we're mainly in this video going to be talking about describing them. We describe them uh, according to how we obstruct the air in our mouth and where we obstruct the air in our mouth. That is the manner and the place of articulation, and some other features. We can voice them and do a few other things to consonants. In order to do this, we're going to have to talk about the mouth, and here we've got a rough map of your mouth. I've circled a couple of new terms that matter to us in blue here. This is a lovely slice through a human head. And if we're going to talk about where the air is obstructed in the mouth, we need to be able to talk about some locations. I'm going to carry a cursor over here. I'm sorry it's not more distinct. We can obstruct air with our lips, as in buh, and then we will call our sound a labial sound or even a bilabial sound. We can use our teeth and call it a dental sound. In English, we have some labiodental. If you say v, you'll notice that you're putting your upper lips on your teeth. There's my cursor, and making a v sound. Or if you say th as in thing, you'll notice that you're putting your tongue between your teeth. That's an interdental sound. More about that in a moment. If you say t or d or even n as in 9, but go ahead and say t, that spot where your tongue is touching is called the alveolar ridge. So we talk about having alveolar sounds. If you say sh or zh, as in genre, your tongue is not quite touching your palate. And in English, we use some pretty forward parts of our palate. In Slavic language, you have straight up palatals, but the palate's important to know. And we have a velum. So we can say g. If you say g or k, some people will call this the soft palate. We're going to call it the velum, and those are velar sounds. As your bonus, you have a uvula, which is the thing that looks like a grape hanging down in the back of your throat. You have a larynx, as we know, which is called your voice box, and an epiglottis, or a glottis, and we have at least one glottal sound in English. That's the glottal stop characteristic of Cockney, right? That we talked about in button and so forth. Other than that, we don't use most of these terms in describing English sounds except for the nasal cavity. We have 3 nasals in English. If you put both your lips together and hum, pass air through your nose, you will have the sound, as in the M sound. If you put your tongue on the alveolar ridge and hum, you'll have the sound, as in 9. And if you touch your tongue to your velum and hum, that is, you say a G and don't release it and hum, you will have the sound, as in going or as in gong. Notice that that's not really a cluster of N and G. It's not an ng, gong. We don't do that. We just pronounce one phoneme. It's a nasal. Gong. It's a velar nasal. There are pharyngeal and laryngeal sounds in some other languages, but we don't have them. We'll mention them at one point later on. So there's your map of the mouth. And here's how we can use our knowledge of that map of the mouth to map out the sounds we actually make in English. First, you're going to notice that in the middle of this screen, there are a bunch of sounds. There are a bunch of symbols we don't use in the writing of English. These are derived from the International Phonetic Alphabet, and it was designed by linguists specifically to spell sounds precisely no matter what language they're used in. And that's why we have it on this sheet. And there are other phonetic spelling systems, but this is the most important one. And as I've already said, we've sort of teased this up. We have places to articulate your sounds. That is the place where your tongue helps stop the air, or other parts of your mouth stop the air. So we have bilabial sounds like p and b and m, and we have labiodental sounds, it's f and v, interdentals, th and the, thin and then. Alveolar sounds, we've got a bunch of them. We have t and d, s and z, n, ul, and for some people, We'll leave alone for a minute. But if you say these sounds, you should notice the tip of your tongue touching that alveolar ridge right behind your teeth. The so-called alveolopalatals, well, yeah, they really are. We have a sh and a zh. We have a ch and a j. So this is sh as in shine, zh as in genre or measure. We have ch as in chin, and we have j as in judge. We don't have a lot of palatals in English. We're going to set the glide aside. We have velar sounds, say k and g as in kin and gill. And we have the velar nasal I've talked about as in king, king, Try it a few times and notice again that it is not a cluster of an N and a G. It is not a ng, king. We don't do that. We make one phoneme there. We go k, I, king. That is a velar nasal. And then we have two glottals. If we want to think of them that way, we have the glottal stop, button, and we have the glottal fricative h, as in high. There are theoretical differences about the H. There's a bottom row here I'm setting aside for a moment. So one thing you should do with this chart is practice pronouncing these words and feeling where the air stops, whether it's your lips and teeth, or your tongue touching part of your mouth that stops it, and be able to identify those areas where you're articulating, the places of articulation in your mouth. The second characteristic that really matters in discussing consonants is the manner of articulation. We have stops. We can stop the air completely, as in b and p, stop. Your book may call these plosives. That's okay. There are different theoretical schemes for describing sounds. I'm usually going to say stop. There is the fricative. We can make the sound, we can make the air whistle. So we can say f and v and v and s and so forth. That's using the friction of the air through our mouth to make the sound. We have affricates, which are a stop and release. They're a little more complex. Ch and j are two affricates here. They in each of those we stop and then release the air into friction. So ch, j, affricates. Nasals, we run the air through our nasal category. You're completely closing your mouth off when we make these and running the air through your nose, which is why we can't say them when we have a cold. You'll notice if you have a cold and your nose is completely stopped up and you try to say these three sounds, you're going to get a stop, which is why people who have a cold sound like they're saying a B when they're trying to say an M, and a D when they're trying to say an N, and so forth. We have a handful of other sounds down here that I want to distinguish from these consonants up top. These consonants up top are really great examples of consonants where we obstruct air in our mouth, and that's how we make a sound. And there can be some complexities. Uh, there's one more thing we can do to any of the sounds in our consonant inventory to make them different from each other, and that is voicing. You'll notice that this chart is shaded according to whether the sound is voiceless or voiced, and that simply has to do with whether you're vibrating your vocal cords where you say it. So the thing to do now is actually touch your larynx, your voice box, your Adam's apple. Touch it with your finger and say the sound p, 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 and then say the sound b, b, b. And you'll notice you feel vibrations when you say buh and duh and guh and zzz. But you won't feel those vibrations when you say p, t, k, s, f, and so forth. That's voicing. We use voicing in English to make a phonemic distinction between consonant sounds. So when you're sorting out your consonants, when you're distinguishing consonants in the sound system of English, in order to make new words, you can take a p, and if I voice it, if I say pin, or if I say pig, I can voice that first sound and say bin or big, and create a minimal pair. Voicing is a phonemically distinctive feature of a sound in English, just as place of articulation is, just as manner of articulation is. That's not a necessary fact of a consonant system, but it is a fact of consonant systems most of the time, and certainly the consonant system in English. We'll see some nuances about that in Middle English. So, in Old English. So, to sum up before I get to the weird consonants, from a phonetic point of view, consonants are made by obstructing air in the mouth, and we distinguish consonants from one another by their place of articulation, their manner of articulation, and their voicing, as far as we care about it in English. Now, and you should definitely be able to talk about bilabial consonants, interdental, alveolar, labiodental. You should be able to talk about those, and you should certainly be able to talk about stops, fricatives, affricates, and nasals all the time. Those are something we need to be able to discuss to talk about the history of the sounds of English. These lower categories, the approximants and the glides, are troublesome, and they're also not the most important sounds to use in telling the general history of English as part of the Indo-European languages. But it's enough to say that the L sound, isn't really produced by obstructing air in the mouth, and neither is the sound, the R. Same with w, same with y, which is what's indicated with the J down there. Of course, the j sound is that alveolo-palatal affricate, j's and judge up top. The thing that looks like a J down there, that's indicating the y sound. So y, w. Phonetically, these are kind of poor fits for the consonant category. But phonologically, in terms of their function in building syllables, they do consonant stuff. They don't really stand alone most of the time as a syllable in the way that a vowel can, and they pair up together or they combine with other consonants and vowels in the way that consonants are expected to. They form consonant clusters, they pair up with vowels to make, or they combine with vowels to make syllables, and so they act like consonants in the sound structure of words. So phonologically, we put them on this. For phonological reasons, they go on the consonant chart. How do they work? It's a little bit dicey. The approximants are called approximants because they're a little vague. They have to do with putting your tongue close to other things, and so they're a little bit tough to describe. The in particular is pronounced a couple different ways, even in English. So or I should say articulated a few different ways. It's usually described as retroflex. Some people create the sound by bringing the very tip of their tongue up and curling it backwards in their mouth. And a lot of people pronounce it by using the so-called bunched R. That is, they kind of hunch the back of their tongue up to fill up the majority of their mouth, especially in the back, and lower that tip of the tongue. I'm a bunched R pronouncer, and I'm sure some of you are retroflex R pronouncers, and most people can't hear the difference. But it's one of the frustrating sounds for children to learn to pronounce, as you know, and it's not a terribly common sound in certainly in European languages. Our glides really mimic vowels in a lot of ways. The voice bilabial w, u, could be construed as a vowel, but again, it, it does consonant work in the building of words, and so it gets treated as a consonant. The same goes for the y. Now that upside down W, the unvoiced or the voiceless bilabial glide, bears a little mentioning. It is an antique sound in English. It's an ancient sound that exists in some varieties of American English. It's the hua sound that some people say in wheat or when or why, and the hua. Um, but but again, not core to our story of English. Well, thank you for that. We will be on to vowels next.